New Zealand versus Argentina the morning after. Let's have a debrief on that World Cup semi-final last night. 44-6 it finished. Absolute beatdown. I'm Tim, this is Egg Chasers, and this is Alfie.
Hello.
Friend of mine, colleague, and YouTuber as well. I'm sure you've checked out Alfie's channel, but it's Alfred Reynolds Rugby. Some quality content, and we've just had a natter actually about tonight's game between England and South Africa, which you can go check out on there.
Yeah, how do England beat South Africa? That going up very shortly on my channel. Maybe, almost certainly, they probably don't, but that's going to be going up very, very
Spoiler
shortly.
alert.
Yeah.
They probably won't. But let's talk about the game we watched last night. I think we've got some Argentinian rugby fans just a couple of tables behind us, actually. Yeah. How do you think they'll be feeling today?
I think they will be disappointed, but also realistic that they simply ran into a far better, more cohesive rugby team. And actually, the semi-finals at this World Cup for Argentina is probably a pretty good result. Their big game was that quarter-final against Wales. They showed up in that. They got themselves to a semi-final.
They took their tops off, swung it around their heads,
and
jumped in with the crowd.
And their celebrations after the game were probably a reflection of the fact that the semi-final was a bit of a free hit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Michael Checker was essentially saying that after the game. And I think that's reasonable as well. A lot of people have focused on the negative of it being such a one-sided semi-final. And again, this is the reason for why the draw was such a joke. And I don't think anyone disagrees with that. There's nobody that disagrees that it wasn't a lopsided draw. I guess the only thing I'd say, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, Alfie, is that there isn't a parallel universe. In a parallel universe, we might have had incredible semi-finals and total one-sided quarterfinals. So there's no silver bullet that makes the Rugby World Cup terrible or incredible.
The average winning margin of the quarterfinals last week was 6 points, which is the lowest it's been in the history of the Rugby World Cup. And sometimes we've seen an average winning margin of 20 points. And you're right, the draw, if you're an Ireland fan, if you're a French fan, is gutting when you see Argentina and England in a semi-final. But overall, given the fact that we're almost certainly not going to get this sort of draw again, I would take the 4 quarterfinals we had last weekend every day of the week over one-sided semi-final.
And that's not just talking because we're Englishmen. Like you say, actually, harsh on France and Ireland because they would have lost one game further on, but they would have lost. That's the important point to remember. In this parallel universe, Ireland and France still lose. But the point being, we got 4 incredible fixtures last weekend. So anyway, it is what it is. It won't happen again, as we've already said. But to flip the chat over to New Zealand, the World Cup finalists again for the 5th time. And some of the comments, actually, when I sort of mentioned it 5 times, incredible Rugby World Cup pedigree, this is the expectation, totally understandable, of New Zealand fans. A lot of comments were like, we've underperformed. We should have been at more World Cup finals.
Well, yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? 2007, 2003, possibly as well. And also, it's kind of ironic that the other year, people saying this is the worst All Blacks team we've ever seen.
That's the bit I wanted to pick up on. It was like, let's just remind ourselves, what were New Zealand fans, what was the New Zealand media, what were sort of general rugby fans saying 6 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago? Yeah,
exactly. Sam Kane questioned, Ian Foster questioned. I think they have had a bit of a shake-up in terms of Joe Schmidt coming in, Jason Ryan coming in. It's not all down to them, which is maybe we might get onto, but it is part of the sense.
Whose appointment was that, by the way? Was that Ian Foster? Because Ian Foster was very cagey with the whole Robertson, don't come to the games thing. That was...
And he wasn't happy about them announcing his successor before the World Cup either, was he? So I don't know, actually. It's a good question. Some All Blacks fans in the comments will probably
Who hired Joe Schmidt? Because, I mean, if it was Ian Foster, went, I need a bit more help with the attack. Get me Joe Schmidt. I mean, masterstroke.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if it was thrust upon him, then maybe it was someone within the New Zealand Rugby Union.
Well, whatever the case, someone appointed them, and it's been fantastic.
And I suppose, looking back on last night, my takeaway is further confirmation of what all of us knew already, but is that if you give this New Zealand team opportunities, they will hurt you no matter who they are. It was always the question with this All Blacks team, I felt, from what we've seen this year. That Rugby Championship game against South Africa, where they blew them away in the first half. They had performances where when they're on top and you give them a chance to be on top, they are so dangerous. And actually, if you look at the red zone efficiency stats from last night, New Zealand's points per red zone entry was like 4 or 4.5 or something ridiculous. Argentina's was like 1 or something. They were really, really poor.
I think just on the flip side as well, some people have construed this as a criticism. But when I said New Zealand know when to give away a good penalty, I mean that as an absolute compliment. It's what the great teams did. We're English, and I grew up watching Leicester Tigers win title after title after title. Whenever the ball was anywhere near their 5 metre line, they would just go in and kill it cynically.
Yeah.
And
Saw a bit of that last night.
Definitely a bit of that last night. But that is actually just the rugby intellect that those players recognise. I mean, Scott Barrett's yellow card was just brain dead. That wasn't. That was when he was on the opposition 5 metre line, not his own. But and an interesting point is, how do you assess what happened with the yellow card and Scott Barrett not coming back on? New Zealand playing with 14 men voluntarily.
Well, I kind of feel like there's an element of this, right? That last week we saw one of the ultimate rugby flexes from the Springboks of Damien Willems calling a mark in the 22 and going for a scrum. And I wonder whether the All Blacks have seen that and thought, how can we better it? Our ultimate rugby flex
so Scott Barrett's yellow card was deliberate. He went, hold on, 65 on the clock. Right, let me give away a stupid yellow so we can do our flex on 75 minutes.
Well, yeah, exactly. Maybe that. But certainly once they had the yellow card, the flex was saying, we can bring Scott Barrett back on and have 15 on 15, or let's just play the last 5 minutes of this World Cup semi-final with 14 men.
Let's do a bit more practice.
Yeah,
down.
Exactly, which was quite... I didn't even realise at the time. The game was so one-sided, it was coming to an end. I'd almost stopped paying attention. It was only this morning I woke up and saw everyone else talking about it and realised they didn't even bring Scott Barrett back on, which I think in a way tells you everything you need to know about that semi-final.
Totally. Well, a couple of things. So just in terms of personnel, we've already mentioned Ian Foster. How much dues is he worth? I think he's surely got to be worth something. Sam Cane, I'm going to hold my hands up and say, I said earlier in this tournament, and I'm voluntarily bringing this back up, I'm sure there are New Zealand fans that would bring it up as well. I said, Sam Cane is a man, when I look at him, I cannot imagine him lifting the Webb Ellis Trophy. I said those words.
His performance last week in the quarterfinal, I was fortunate enough to be here in Paris. Legitimately one of the best captain's performances I've ever seen. I thought he was outstanding, as were many of those All Black players. But yeah, he's certainly, I think, used a lot of the criticism he's faced as motivation for the latter stages of this World Cup.
Yeah, I'd love to know if those WhatsApp messages were genuine or not, but very interesting. And finally, in terms of personnel, Will Jordan has equalled the World Cup try-scoring record along with Jonah Lomu, along with Julian Savia and Brian Habana.
Yeah.
I mean, incredible names to be alongside. Thing is, if he doesn't break it with a try next weekend, Richie Mwanga could have just given him a pass to run in and beat the record.
Just about to say the same thing, as he should have the record already, because Richie Mwanga should have passed to him towards the end of the game. But he's been ridiculous, Will Jordan. He's one of those guys, isn't he, that he makes it look so easy. Like when he has the ball, I'm trying to think of other players that are like that. There have been a few over the past that you don't look at them and think, oh, well, they're absolutely rapid or they're incredibly hard to bring down, but they beat people, they score tries. Was it 31 tries in 30 test matches?
The way he glides, the way he runs, he glides like Christian Cullen.
Yeah.
And actually, the comparison is probably, and I think we take it for granted because he's been around for so long, but he reminds me of Bowden Barrett. Go back 8 years.
Yeah.
When Bodie was a youngster, and you're like, oh man, this kid's dynamite.
Yeah.
And just the skill set is incredible. The way he moves and glides and finds space. He's a very, very special player.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think there's quite a few in the All Blacks team at the moment. Like Richie Mwanga's always been a good fly half. Having watched him the last couple of weeks, I'm wondering, right now on form, is he the best fly half in the world? Arnie Savert, obviously, he's always been good. Geordie Barrett inside centre, outstanding. And
I'm going to mention finally, before we move on from New Zealand, their maul and their scrum.
Yeah, and actually I think that's where the coaching changes, and that when we talk about Jason Ryan coming in, when we talk about Joe Schmidt, the front five is the biggest area I think this New Zealand team had to improve from that lost home series against Ireland to where they are now. Yeah. And actually that's the area of the team that, if you look at the team sheet, has had the most change as well, particularly that front row. The rest 100%. Of the team, they've reshuffled the back line a little bit, but it's generally the same players. It is that front five. That, I think, is a big reason of why the All Blacks find themselves in a World Cup final.
And their names that you can imagine all being involved in a World Cup in 4 years' time, which is frightening for the rest of us. And with that, I will say well done again to New Zealand. Thank you, Alfie.
Pleasure.
Alfred Reynolds Rugby is where you can find him. Hit subscribe on this channel if you haven't already. Give the video a thumbs up. That helps the algorithm. I don't know how, but it does. And leave your comments as well. I'll see you on the next one. And next videos will be back at the Stade de France. Bring it on.